Okay, everybody got it? Okay. So Lieder or German art song, it's one of those genres that has been around. It's been around in the 18th century, but as it develops in the 19th century, um, it really becomes a reflection of a lot of romantic ideals. And if you just got your anthology and sat back down, we're on page 399, 399 in the anthology. Um, so initially, these are settings of German poetry for piano and voice. And there were certain poets that composers in the early part of the Romantic period that they were very interested in setting. And they were very popular poets. Everybody was reading these poets. And one of them is Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And that's who wrote the poem for this particular piece. And Goethe wrote, this poem comes from a larger play that's called Faust. And Faust is, I'll write that in here. Faust is the main character, that's the name of the main character, and he is an intellectual that's interested in having as much power as he possibly can. So he makes a deal with Mephistopheles, the devil, to have supernatural powers. And one of the things that he wishes for is to make anyone fall in love with him that he wants to have fall in love with him. And that's who this Gretchen character is. It's his love interest. So at this point in the story, when she is singing this song, he has already wooed her and they've already consummated their relationship. And now he's gone off to other things, to other exploits with Mephistopheles, and left her behind. So she is pining away from him, pining away for him. So if we look at the text that starts at the bottom of page 399, it starts off with, my peace is gone, my heart is heavy, I'll never find this peace again, never again. And if you turn the page to 400, you see that that text does come back. Okay. But as you look through each one of the verses, at the top of the page 400, she's talking about, when I don't have him, it's like a tomb. The next verse is, my poor head is confused. And then the next one is, I'm looking for him, I'm waiting for him. But the next two verses start talking about how good looking she thinks that he is, right? He's got a lofty bearing. He's got a noble figure. I love his smile. I love his eyes. And then eventually in the next verse, it goes to how much she likes kissing him, right? So that's sort of the peak. And you notice there's an exclamation point there. And then we go back to her heart pining away, right? That she's unhappy. So I wanted to bring this part out of the text to you. So as we're listening to it, you pay attention to how Schubert responds to this text. Okay? So we're going to listen. And the two things I want you to pay attention to are, number one is how Schubert uses the piano and how that's connected to the text, and how the melodic material and other musical elements reflect the meaning of the text. All right, here we go. From the beginning, page 394.
Meine Ruhe ist hin, mein Herz ist schön. Ich finde sie nimmer und nimmer mehr. Wo ich ihn nicht hab, ist mir das Grab. ich finde sie nimmer und nimmermehr. Mein Busen drängt sich nach ihm hin, ach, dürft ich fassen und halten ihn und küssen ihn, so wie ich wollt, und seinen Küssen vergehen sollt. O, könnt ich ihn küssen, so wie ich wollt, und seinen Küssen vergehen sollt, und seinen Küssen vergehen sollt. Meine Ruh ist hin, mein Herz ist schwer.
All right. Let me go through just a few things and then I'll open it up for questions. Okay. So what you notice about this piece from the very beginning is that the vocalist doesn't begin the piece. It starts with the piano, and already as we're listening to the piano, we know that whatever the singer is going to sing about, that she's not happy, right? So it's in a minor key. We're in G minor, and uh, the 16th note pattern that's in the right hand not only increases some anxiety, but it's also reflective of what she's doing at this time, which is spinning, right? So the 16th notes give us a pattern of spinning round and round and round. And then she begins her vocal line with meine Ruhe ist hin, right? Now, the other thing that I want to point out is, you know, the musical style is very similar as she's talking about how she's suffering. But then when we get to measure 51, and if you go ahead and look at measure 51, that's when the text starts to talk about how good looking he is, right? How good looking Faust is and his countenance that leads up to the kiss. And what you notice there in measure 51 is that it moves into F major. So we're not in a minor key anymore. And then what he does as he moves through this is he keeps ratcheting things up by half steps, okay? So it starts to get more chromatic and the vocal line starts to get higher and higher till we get to the pinnacle, and he really puts some time in between the words from 65, 66, 67, and 68, so that there's a real focus on the word kiss, and that is the highest pitch that the performer has sung, and it's a sforzando, right? And that sforzando actually starts in measure 63, right? So you get the intensity of how she feels about him. So he's made an alteration. And then we go back to, in measure 73, what the beginning of the piece is like, that we're back in G minor, okay, where she's talking about pining away for him. Let's just listen to that part again. I'm going to back it up on the score on page 396 where it says 1 minute and 12 seconds. And we'll start listening there. And that will get us into where he switches gears to where she's talking about how good looking he is.
Nach ihm schau ich zum Fenster hinaus, nach ihm geh ich aus dem Haus, sein hoher
Feel the shift there to F major.
niedere Gestalt, seines Mundes Lächeln, seiner Augen Gewalt und seiner Rede Zauberfluss, sein Händedruck und auch sein Kuss.
Right, so then a nice break there. All right, so these are some of the ways that Schubert's interpreting text, and you see the importance of the keyboard in that example. So what kind of questions do you have about this particular example, or anything else that you might have noticed?
I think it's cool just when you, I don't know, at least for me, I mean, obviously I haven't done a ton of this until I started taking music history last semester. So I think it's neat just like, especially with when it comes to the lyrics, I guess, because I do sing and the
Hmm.
importance of that and like knowing the translation. And then like when she starts talking about like what he looks like and how it changes to F major, just all that knowledge, it just brings so much more meaning to the piece. It's not
Yeah,
just like, oh, it changed there, but like, I don't know why it changed, but
right.
having that
Right.
knowledge, it makes it more fun to listen to. And
Hmm.
it's just cool to see those different things.
Hmm. And everyone can feel when that begins and you're listening to, that spinning of those 16th notes, right? You may not be thinking about necessarily, but if she started singing about happy clowns, you would be surprised, right? If that was the text, right? You have the expectation. He's trying to build up your expectation of what's coming up with the very opening of that piece. Um, I think another thing to notice too is that most of the text setting for this example is syllabic. So there are a few places where he has some melismas, but not a lot. And that should cue you into how important it is for Schubert for you to understand what the poetry is and how important he thinks that text is. So it's not so much about a singer being able to show off virtuosically, but to be able to very um, beautifully express this text and add something to it and not take away from the text. And what's interesting about that is Schubert tried to send some of his song settings to Goethe because he wanted to be the one to set Faust as an opera. And Goethe didn't like the settings because he thought it took away too much. Like there was too much focus on how the music was beautiful and it made it into something else. So he didn't particularly like them. Uh, he likes settings of his music that were basically strophic. Do you remember what strophic form is? Does everybody remember what strophic form is, kind of? Let me go back to the page in the PowerPoint to show that to you, because this is another Schubert song that's strophic, Heidenrüslein. So it's a three-voice poem, but Schubert just writes one verse that gets used. He just writes one verse of music that gets used for every verse of the song, right? So that's a strophic form. That's what Goethe actually preferred. Now, the other forms that were pretty common besides strophic were modified strophic and through composed. The piece that we just listened to is actually a through composed, but kind of a rondo form, because the minor root, my piece is gone, keeps coming back over and over again, kind of like a reprise, but not exactly. It's more like a rondo theme. So its form, it really goes beyond these, but these are the most common forms that are used in lieder composition. Okay, and you're probably going to find some of those in the Schubert examples that you're going to listen to for your next assignment. Okay. Other questions about this example, about what we listened to? I just want to reinforce that where this music was most commonly performed were in salons, and I went over that in the PowerPoint. The salons became more and more popular, and that's really where Schubert was gained his notoriety. Were in different salons in Vienna, and there were salons all over Europe during this time period. Really popular, were famous ones that helped make people's careers, and uh, people were able to play these smaller kinds of genres and have more people hear them, because it wasn't necessarily common for a song like this to be performed on a concert stage. And Schubert's career was not made from music that he wrote for the concert stage. So he wrote several symphonies. You may be most familiar with his unfinished symphony, right? Da 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 da, right? But he wasn't. People didn't. Were not as excited about his symphonies as they were Beethoven. And he is a contemporary of Beethoven, so he really felt a contemporary of Beethoven in Vienna. So he really felt in the shadow of Beethoven throughout his career. He also tried to compose some operas, and his operas did not get off the ground. Was not well known as an operatic composer. But what he did do was write over 500 lieder during a very short lifespan. So he really changes the game for lead composition, right? And it has to do with that relationship between the pianist and the vocalist. And that's why I really like the term for pianist as collaborative pianists rather than accompanists, because that's really what's going on, is a collaboration. And really thought about creative and sensitive ways to set the text, to amplify the text, right? Like the example that we just listened to with the anxiety building as, or the tension building as she talks about his looks and his kiss. And that reflects her excitement and her desire and for her lover. Okay. All right. Anything else about that? Did you have a chance to look at the PowerPoint for leader yet? Have you looked at that? Okay. I think that would be a useful thing to do, and I strongly suggest that you do that before you do the Schumann assignment over the weekend, or today, or whenever it is that you're going to do it. So for the Schumann example, the next piece in the anthology are excerpts from Schumann's song cycle Dichterliebe that he did in 1840. And I'd like for you to listen to the whole thing, but then just choose 2 of them to write about, and write about the things that we've just talked about with the Schubert example. How is the piano functioning? What is the form? And how is he setting the text? And how does he better reflect what's happening in the text? Okay. The other interesting thing about the Schumann example is he composed this in 1840, and that was the year that he and his wife, Clara Schumann, got married. She also composed Lieder during this time period, and they did a lot of things together. So there's a lot of love poetry from 1840 between the 2 of them. So it was a long time coming, their marriage. Her father did not want her to marry Robert Schumann, and they had to go to court to sort of force him to let her marry him. So they were very excited to be able to be married, and they wanted to compose a lot of love poetry. So they did. Okay. Anything else about leader at this point? Okay, let me ask you how things are going with the class and how I've got things organized. Is it too much? No? Is it not enough? Is there something else I
good.
Yeah?
I mean, so far
So far?
feels good.
Like,
Okay.
I don't know if I can really gauge about how things are going now until we actually have another exam.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
like everything else was what we'd already learned in class before.
Right. So what I was thinking as I put things together for next week is that on Monday I would have some sort of something that would be a little cumulative about what we've done this week. So some sort of assignment that would ask you to talk about the differences in Beethoven and Schubert's careers, and how the different genres that we looked at reflect their careers, and what are the interesting pieces about, what are the interesting musical elements for those genres that we talked about in class, to sort of write it all together and put it down in one place in a sort of comparative kind of way. So that's one of the things